Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. So he's the founder of Product Culture. He helps companies like Vistaprint, Huawei, amongst many others, achieve their product visions through forums, workshops, advising, and private coaching. He's the president emeritus of the Boston Product Management Association and a head judge at the annual Harvard Business School New Venture Competition. He co-wrote Product Roadmaps Relaunched, with C. Todd Lombardo, amongst other people. I know we had C. Todd with us a couple of months ago. And so, ladies and gentlemen, delighted to introduce joining us today from Massachusetts, Bruce McCarthy.
Thanks very much, David. Good to be with you. And thanks everybody for coming to talk about OKRs for product teams. I'm gonna switch over to some slides and give you guys sort of my tips in working with product teams all over the world on OKRs and how we can make them work really well for product teams and be an asset. First, I want to start off with mentioning the product road mapping book that David just mentioned. A few years ago, some friends and I, C. Todd, Evan, and Michael got together, and we wrote this book on product roadmaps. And one of the core principles of our relaunched approach to roadmaps was that it focuses, a good roadmap should not focus on so much features and dates as on goals, on objectives, on what we call outcomes rather than outputs. And it's no coincidence then that we had a whole chapter on setting those outcomes, those objectives, which was really a chapter about OKRs. And to be honest with you all, that's been one of the most popular parts of the book, the one I get the most questions on, I think, after how do we make this work in our organization. So I wanted to dig deep into some of the things that I've learned in working with teams all around the world on OKRs and how I've seen them be successful. Because while OKRs are a super simple concept, and they've been used successfully in many organizations like Google and so on all around the world, they're also easy to get wrong and to make things worse. So let's dig into it, and then we'll take a bunch of questions at the end, as many as we have time for. So OKRs, I think they actually are a really natural fit with the sort of cross-functional product teams, the squads model that many of us are using. The whole team should be on the same page about what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that they also map directly, as I mentioned, to the business objectives in your outcomes-based roadmaps. But I also think that if you start your journey, as many have, with John Doerr's book, Measure What Matters on OKRs, that you may be led astray in a few places. In particular, some of the examples in the book I think are misleading. So let me dig into that. But before I do, let me define some terms. Objectives and key results. What are these things in case you're not super familiar with them or you want a refresher? The objective part of the framework is what you want to accomplish. It's the goal. It's the inspirational, but maybe a little bit fuzzy BHAG or thing that you point at and say, yeah, that's what we're shooting for. And then paired with the somewhat fuzzy but easy to understand and remember objective is our key results. And key results are not the list of things to do in order to accomplish your objectives, but the measurable proof that you have succeeded in reaching that objective, or haven't succeeded, or have partially succeeded. It's how you will know. That's what the key results really are. Let me give you a concrete example. Suppose that we have an objective to get real traction for our brand new mobile app. We've got it out, we've got a few people kicking the tires, and we want to get real growth and traction. That sounds inspirational. That sounds like a good idea. It sounds like something we could all rally around. But how do we measure traction? What's our way of saying, yes, we have traction, or no, we don't? Well, we might say, okay, traction is daily active users. And if we have a number now, we want to get it to a bigger number that we would all agree would constitute traction. But maybe active users isn't the only thing we want. Maybe we also need to get some people turning into paid users. So let's have another key result that is to increase the conversion rate from free to paid, from some low number to some more aggressive number. And then maybe it's not just the conversion rate, but the actual number of paying customers that we need in order to feel like we really have got traction. And if we get to a threshold number of some hundreds or thousands or millions of users that we all feel would represent traction, then we would be able to say that if we hit all of these key results in all completely or in large part, that we have accomplished the inspirational but fuzzy goal as measured by our key results. That's really the essence of OKRs. And if you've got an app, then you can see right away how that might apply to your particular product. Now, that's the definition, but I have 5 principles, 5 tips, 5 insights that I've had about how these apply in particular with product teams that I want to share. And these are them. Number 1, a reminder, focus on outcomes. Number 2, ideas. And number 3, health metrics are complementary to those measurable outcomes and useful to separate out. Number 4, frequently measuring progress. And number 4, it's important that we think about this from a team perspective and not an individual perspective. Let me go into each one of these a little bit. So outcomes. My favorite Google product manager, Shobit Chugh, said to me, in his opinion, the biggest problem that he sees with OKRs, even at Google, is that they're done backwards. That people say, what is it that we've already agreed to do? What is it that is already on our backlog? Let's just make that our OKRs. And that's not going top down the way OKR should work. That's not saying, what are we trying to accomplish? Then how shall we accomplish it? It's the other way around. So I like to say, when I ask somebody, all right, suppose that you are working on a new app or a new solution of some kind, what would be a logical OKR for something that's actually not out yet? And you might say, well, our objective is to launch the thing. We're going to launch our MVP. That's the first thing. And frankly, we can't measure anything until we do that, right? And I say, no, launching is not a good objective, or a KR for that matter. It's a thing to do. You want to ask yourself, how could we measure the success of launching that thing? How would we measure that it worked, that we didn't just launch it, but we launched it successfully? And an attempt to be measurable, to do what Marissa Meyer would say, to put a number on it. People will say, okay, fine. We'll ship the first 3 features and we'll call that our MVP, and we'll call that our objective because it's measurable, right? You can measure how many features. And I would say, no, that again is a thing to do. Ship those 3 features. It's not a result. The question I would always be asking is, if you ship those 3 features and if your MVP is successful, what will be the result? And the result should be that you can get customers to use it, that you can get them to want it, try it at least, and start to give you feedback. So a reasonable KR for successful launch of something entirely new would be to onboard your first few customers. And then if you really want to measure success, have them convert from your beta to your paid general availability. Something like that. Felipe Castro, another one of my favorite OKR experts, says, and I think he's right, an objective is not the thing you do, it is the successful outcome of what you did. And that's really the thing to bear in mind. Even when you feel like your team's job is to ship features, always be asking, well, will these features serve our objectives? And when we're setting our objectives, can we describe them in terms of the results we would want from those features? So outcomes is number 1. The second thing is, even when I've spent all this time preaching that we want our OKRs to be outcome driven, nonetheless, we're all used to, as humans, putting down our list of things to do. We just can't resist. And so those tend to creep into the KRs. And I'm sure some of you who've done this have seen that. And so what I like to do is to give people a separate place, a separate bucket, along with the objectives and the KRs for ideas or initiatives or features or epics or stories or whatever you want to call them. They're your things to do. And I think it's fine and good to actually make a list of those and consider them separate from your OKRs. If you separate them out, then the question you're asking yourself after you've written your objectives and your key results is, what might we do to achieve our OKRs? Let's go into our interminable backlog and let's pick out the things that might help us reach our objective this sprint. So, for example, you might say, well, if our goal is to increase daily active users, we might implement push notifications, or we might create special events that bring people on board, or we might make customer support more accessible because without that, people tend to abandon, or create some sort of loyalty program. These are all classic ideas and tactics for improving usage and engagement. And they all make sense because we've set the objective correctly. If instead we just put push notifications on the backlog, well, how will we know if push notifications are really doing for us what we want? We won't know unless we've agreed in advance that daily active users is the goal. And push notifications is just one idea for how to hit that goal. And now this can fit into your agile process really well. Imagine at the start of the quarter, you set your OKRs, and then you develop your ideas for things to do. You ship some of those, you measure the results, and then you re-examine your assumptions. You recalibrate based on what you've learned, and then you repeat that cycle. And this part in the middle, between the developing the ideas and the measuring the results, should ideally fit into one or at most a few agile sprints. Set the OKRs, sprint to try to test your ideas about how to meet those OKRs, recalibrate your approach if necessary, rinse and repeat, and just keep doing that until you hit those OKRs or decide you need to change them. The other thing I wanted to talk about is health metrics, another complementary concept that can help keep your OKRs from getting too cluttered. You ever notice that sometimes you have a discussion with the team about what's the most important things to accomplish this sprint or this quarter, and there seem to be a whole lot of them. There seem to be, instead of maybe 1 or 2 or 3 OKRs, you've got 7 or 10. Well, it's really hard to keep that in your head, and it's really hard to focus on that many. So, but it's also really hard sometimes to leave out things that, while they might not be a focus right now, you need to not forget. And so I think of health metrics as something that is like OKRs, but separate. They are, another word for them some people use is KPIs, or key performance indicators. And in my mind, they're the numbers you want to keep an eye on that you don't want to change. Things like, minimum amount of money in the bank to make payroll, or uptime, or other SLAs, or ticket resolution time, or NPS, employee or customer NPS. The thing about these health metrics is, if they were to go out of range, you would want to act on them. But if they are healthy, you don't want to act on them. Except to do the usual sort of maintenance. So to separate out this concept of health metrics, have a dashboard, keep an eye on it, helps to simplify and skinny down the number of OKRs that you have to deal with. Health metrics have an acceptable healthy range, and as long as they're within that range, say an App Store rating of 4 or better, then you don't need to worry about them. Just monitor them. So So there's these four concepts: the objectives, the health metrics, and the ideas, along with the KRs. And this is kind of a Miro board in simulation about how I think about using those all in conjunction. You, at the start of the quarter, you set your OKRs and you set your health metrics, and then you generate a bunch of ideas and you put them into your backlog. And then at any given sprint, you look at, where are we with our OKRs? Where are we with our health metrics? If we're on track with everything, we just take the next ideas from the backlog and put them into the sprint. If, on the other hand, the health metrics were to fall out of line, at the end of a sprint, you might generate some new ideas for how to get the health metrics back online before putting them into the sprint. The other thing I want to talk about that I think is really important and often overlooked is frequent measurement of progress. A lot of teams, I think, live with sort of leftover habits from the old days of management by objectives and traditional secret handshakes with your boss about what your real objectives and bonus would be based on. Sort of feel like OKRs are one of those things that you do once a year or once a quarter. You set them, you forget them, and then you're surprised when you don't meet them. And instead, I think OKRs are meant to be used as a kind of a core part of your weekly operating system, or at least your every sprint operating system. So rather than check in on progress with your OKRs annually, quarterly, monthly, I would say at a minimum, every 2 weeks, you want to be checking in on progress against your OKRs. And maybe more often. Some organizations, like Facebook, is famous for watching statistics in real time. I'd say the quicker the review cycle, the quicker the opportunity is for you to move the needle on learning, to move the needle on intelligence, to be able to learn a lot and make decisions and move quickly. It fits logically with your sprint cadence to examine the results of your OKRs before going into planning for the next sprint, as I just demonstrated. But if you can do it even more often, that's great. A lot of people ask, well, how do I actually fit OKR progress reviews into our meeting cadence? I don't really want to have another meeting if I can avoid it, right? And I agree with that. Instead of scheduling a separate OKR status meeting, what I like to do is actually incorporate it into the first few minutes of an existing meeting, like a sprint planning meeting, if you're at the squad level, or if you're at the departmental or other larger level, then how about the start of a regular staff meeting? I just had a meeting like that with the executive team of a company that I work with, 9 executives on the management team of this company. And we spent the first 15 minutes reviewing the status on OKRs and deciding if any of the things that were not quite on track needed a larger discussion later in the meeting. We just did a quick round of status as a way of discovering what is it we need to talk about. OKRs are not really a separate process from your business. They are a supporting process for knowing what's important and what's really going on in your business in terms of the goals you set for that business or product. So what would a progress review meeting in just a few minutes at the start of your regular staff meeting look like? Well, first, review the health metrics and the OKR results to date. They should already be in whatever tool, even if it's just a spreadsheet, that you're using. And review progress to date on any of the ideas or initiatives or backlog items you have in progress that are meant to drive those results. Review what's been learned from the above so far. If everything's on track, this all should take about 2 minutes to go through, but probably some things are delayed or at risk. And so what have you learned from those delays or at-risk things that informs what you might do differently? At that point, you can decide on any changes to your sprint backlog or your priorities or to the ideas needed to get your health metrics back on track if they're off, or to achieve your OKRs from here. This way of saying, all right, we're going to quickly review status in a couple of minutes and then figure out what we're going to do about that status, is how a status meeting should really be done anyway, rather than my favorite style of meeting, which is to have everybody in a room where everybody gets to talk for 5 minutes about their thing while nobody else pays attention and just does email. That's a waste of everybody's time, so let's not do that. In the end, we're going to decide on, if necessary, any changes to the health metrics or OKRs as well. Not only, this is the other thing about OKRs that people don't seem to immediately grasp, is that changing your OKRs, even in the middle of the quarter, is not cheating if it's because you've learned more than you knew when you set the OKRs to begin with. That process of adjusting your OKRs based on new information is called recalibration. And you're allowed to recalibrate your OKRs at any time that you realize that the original goals were unrealistic. And when you're recalibrating your measurable OKRs, you can change the date or rewrite the objective to reflect what you've learned, or make the KRs more meaningful or achievable. Google, famous for using OKRs, when they first came out with the Chrome browser, set an ambitious goal for 3 million downloads. They set that goal for their first year and they didn't achieve it. But they kept the goal because they knew it was the right one. They just changed the date. And it took them a while to get there. I think it was something like 3 years, but they did eventually get there, learning along the way what it was taking to get toward that number and always recalibrating until they got there. The learning was the most important bit. The learning is more important than the actual 100% achievement of the goals themselves. So that's the progress piece, the progress monitoring and measuring and deciding. And the last piece I want to talk about is the team structure that's ideal for OKRs. I'm a product guy, and so my sort of going in assumption was that the teams behind OKRs should not be departments, but should be cross-functional, like a product squad. And I kind of hate this example, this classic example from John Doerr in his book, Measure What Matters, of a general manager of an American football team whose job it is to win the Super Bowl and fill the stands. He parses out those two goals to different departments. The head of PR has the fill the stands goal, and the head coach has the win the Super Bowl goal. And then it gets further broken down into functional departments within those two overall organizations. And this is just an extremely unrealistic and misleading way to think about meeting goals. I mean, think about it. We know that more people in the stands makes it more likely that the home team will win, right? And we know that a winning track record makes it more likely that people will fill the stands. So it's not like we can actually assume that there's no influence left to right on this chart. So I think this is unrealistic. And my favorite way, instead of organizing by department, is to say, what are the top level goals of the company? And then let's have cross-functional product teams, maybe at their core, but any cross-functional teams owning those key objectives and KRs for the company. And if we're going to create a second layer or even a third layer, I don't want to see it broken down by department. I want to see it broken down by who is necessary to accomplish the goal. And let's put together a virtual team from people from all different departments that will contribute. Marty Kagan says, if you're going to use OKRs in your for your products, focus those OKRs at the product team level, not at the individual level, not at the department level. A real world example of this in action is this Finnish company called Supercell. They are the makers of mobile games like Boom Beach and Clash Royale, and Clash of Clans was their first big hit. And they have a very interesting organization structure. Their CEO, this is him here, Ilkka Pannanen, calls himself the world's least powerful CEO, because rather than building a huge pyramid of multiple layers of hierarchy, he just has a series of teams or cells, that's the name of the company, Supercell, of 5 to 7 people, each of which is responsible for a game. So Clash Royale, 5 to 7 people. Those teams are independently responsible for pretty much everything to do with a game. Marketing, design, engineering, artwork, everything. Community management, the entire thing. And his process is just to give them a goal of having a successful game, which, they have measures for in terms of users and money and things like that. But that's it. Make a successful game. And then he gives them the power to figure out how they're going to do that on their own. He has officially, there's a process where he has to approve a game proposal, but apparently he's never actually turned any of them down, because it's up to the team to figure out how to meet the goals. And it must work, because those are some of the most successful mobile games of all time. And at one point, the company, early in its growth phase, was described as the fastest growing company of any type ever by investors who were early investors in companies like Facebook and Uber, who should know. That's the kind of model we're talking about. And when I say a product squad, I don't just mean designers, engineers, and product managers. If you also need artists, if you also need data analysts, if you also need community managers or content developers, those should be part of the squad too, because they're what's necessary to accomplish the OKR. And this is how we avoid, I think, departmental silos. This last bit here is kind of the most common thing that I am running into that I want to describe, and that is the relationship between the company level OKRs and the team level OKRs. The way it should work, I think, is that the executive team gets together and develops a set of company level OKRs, whatever they happen to be, and then they invite teams, cross-functional teams from around the organization, to propose OKRs for those teams as well. And then we have a conversation, a debate, a negotiation, a process of aligning those company level OKRs and team level OKRs. Both sides may need to be tweaked. Until we go through this third step, company, then teams, then alignment, nobody's OKRs are done. It's not a top-down process, and it's not only a bottom-up process either. It's both. It's a meet in the middle process. And I think, for example, if you wanted to play out an example, let's suppose that at the company level, we have a goal of increasing our market share overall. Well, team A might say, okay, great. Our market share can be measured by daily active users, so that's one of our goals. We're going to increase daily active users for our product, and that will contribute to the market share goal. We're also going to work on our conversion rate, because the better the conversion rate, the faster the market share will grow. And then a different team, maybe they have a different product, maybe they're just launching, and so they want to have a goal of getting their first 1,000 downloads, which should also, if successful, contribute to market share over time. And then team C, maybe they're in charge of a more mature product. that is having trouble growing, but we certainly don't want it to shrink because that will harm market share. So their goal is simply to reduce churn and increase retention. That way they also are contributing to market share. Now, you notice there isn't like a breakdown or a one-to-one correspondence between the company and the team level. And that's very deliberate because I don't think it works that way in real life. With all the teams that I've been working with and companies in countries all around the world, I've never seen it really work well when it's broken down by functional silos. I see it work much better when we have a cross-functional team sharing either a goal or a contributing goal to something at the company level that's important all around the organization. So those are my 5 principles of applying OKRs to product teams. Focus on outcomes relentlessly, separate out the ideas that are designed to reach those outcomes because they may or may not succeed. Have also separated out your health metrics so that you can monitor them without letting them blind you to the forward movement you need to make on outcomes. Measure your progress as frequently as you can, at least every couple of weeks. And if you feel like, well, our project is a quarter long, how are we supposed to measure progress unless we're just measuring progress on completing the project? And that sounds antithetical to everything I just said. Then maybe your project size of a full quarter is too big, and you need to break it down into smaller, more agile deliverables whose results you can measure. And then let's do it in cross-functional teams that have all within them the capability to reach those goals. That's my summary, but I'm on a journey just like all of you of learning what works and what doesn't work. And I'm always collecting additional questions that are not yet solved in how to use any goal-setting framework, but in particular, we're talking about OKRs today, in helping teams succeed. So in a minute, we're going to have Q&A, but I would love you to take 1 minute right now and fill out this quick SurveyMonkey survey. It's 6 questions, and they're, 1, giving me feedback on this talk. If I covered something that was useful to you, I want to hear about it. If I left something out that's important, I want to hear about it. If there's a fundamental problem or challenge you're having with OKRs, this is the place to put it so that I can do some research, run some experiments, figure out what works, and put it into my next talk. I hope this has been helpful. If you'd like to follow along on my learning journey, I have a weekly, what I call nano letter. It's really as short as this screenshot that you're looking at here. It's meant to be read on one screen on your phone while you're getting or making coffee. And it's called One Thing on Product Culture, and it comes out every Thursday. You can subscribe at productculture.org. And with that, I'm going to escape from slide land and get back to our discussion. I'd love to take some questions.
First of all, thank you so much, Bruce, for sharing all of those tips and expertise with us. I think OKR it's a really important topic because so many organizations are trying to adopt this kind of more outcome-focused approach to goal setting. So really appreciate it. So guys, we have a few minutes for questions. So please add your questions. I see one in there already into the Q&A panel of Skills Matter of our platform here today. And just while we're waiting for questions, and we'll get to Ashmeet's first question now in a sec. I know that a few of the points you mentioned, Bruce, around, I love that kind of backwards OKR anti-pattern. It kind of reminds me of like, you know, a user story, you know, the anti-patterns around that. Like as a developer, I want to build code so I can get this done. So, you know, any of these kind of frameworks can be used or misused. I really like the example you shared there. Okay, so let's get to our first question. So Ashmi, thank you for adding that. So do these KPIs not feed into the OKRs? A common problem is this adds too many things on my plate to track along with OKRs.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm totally sympathetic with Ashmeet's situation. I don't want to create too many numbers, too many goals, too many dashboards, too many reports for you to follow. Focus is really important here. The thing I see over and over again with teams is too many OKRs, and that is precisely why I wanted to separate out the ideas and separate out the health metrics or KPIs, so that they don't clutter up your OKRs. So if you've got an OKRs spreadsheet, I want it to just have the OKRs. And if you're a product team, I don't want you to have more than 3 OKRs going at any time with more than 3 KRs each. So that would be a 9 by 9. That would be a 3 by 3 or 9 place grid. In fact, Christina Woodkey, whose excellent book I can recommend, Radical Focus, new edition has just come out with an expanded framework section at the back, says that she thinks most product teams really only ought to have 1 OKR per quarter or per focus time period. And that really drives some significant focus. My sort of mantra is that you should be able to rattle off your OKRs from memory. You shouldn't have to look at the spreadsheet or the tool. And if you've got too many of them, you're not going to be able to do that. These KPIs or the health metrics are meant as a way, Ashmeet, to push other things that you want to not lose track of into the background. It's kind of like I always keep a to-do list that's longer than the things that I can do in the day, but it's kind of in the background. I have a smaller to-do list that's just for today. And that's what the OKRs are for. And the KPIs or health metrics are background. You only pay attention to them when it's time to measure progress or monitor how things are going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. Ashmeet, just reply in the chat if you do have any follow-on questions, Ashmeet, or if that doesn't make sense. So just a quick one for myself, Bruce.
Yeah.
It was just something that came up during the talk. So how might you tie OKRs back to your product roadmap?
Great question. There are two places where OKRs can come into your roadmap. One is that really a roadmap shouldn't just be that grid of what we're doing when at the end of a roadmap presentation. It should be an entire statement of here's our long-term vision, here are the big steps that we need to execute on to get there, and here are our business objectives that will track our progress. Things like market share or number of customers or revenue or what have you. And those business objectives, one of the 5 core components of a roadmap that we describe in the book, are easily represented as OKRs. So I would expect your roadmap presentation, even if it was only 4 slides, to include your OKRs. They are how you will measure the success, not just the delivery, but the success of your roadmap. And then the second place I would use them is for any given feature. Let's suppose that or any given item on your roadmap, the core item for a roadmap that we describe in the book is not a feature, but what we call a theme, which is a problem statement or a need that the customer has. And so if you've described that need as a thing on your roadmap that you're going to solve for, well, how do you know if you've solved it? You need measurable proof. So you can use OKRs at that more granular level too, to say every roadmap item should have its own set of OKRs that ideally tie back to your overall OKRs for the whole roadmap. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah, thanks very much, Bruce. I like that kind of tying back to the bigger picture goals as well. That's great. So thank you for that. A couple of other questions. I think Justin was just asking if we could share the Survey Monkey link. I think he's looking to give feedback through the Survey Monkey.
Right.
So maybe through the.
I can grab that link, and it should be, dang it.
No worries. So folks, again, we'll take just another couple of questions. If you do have any other questions, I see one from Tanya. So Tanya's question is, how do you handle dependencies in OKRs if they occur in different teams? So for example, team A can only contribute if team B changes or does something, and it may not be a priority for team B.
Right. Okay, so two things. Number one, the best way to handle dependencies is not to have them. And that's my favorite method, and that is if you set up your teams such that they have within them the skills and the permission to do whatever it takes to reach their goals, well, then they don't need to depend on team B. Now, I know that that's not 100% achievable. It's one of those things you're always working toward, but never quite completely achieve. You wouldn't be in the same company at all if there were no dependencies whatsoever. So it is number one, always ask that question, always push for, well, could we do this ourselves? But if you can't, if you really do need to depend on team B, well, then that's part of that alignment process that I described. You start with the top level OKRs at the top of the company, you develop the team level OKRs, and then you have alignment. Well, the alignment is not just top to bottom, it's also left to right. It's also team to team. And so if you present your OKRs and your ideas of how to accomplish those OKRs in team B's presence, it would be the right time to say, while we're still in the draft phase, and in order to accomplish this, we need this from you, team B. Can you help us? And you might get a yes, in which case you're good. Then that hopefully fits into their OKRs. Or you might get a no. And if you get a no, you want to negotiate. You're going to say, well, could you help us? Even I know you didn't put it on your list, but could you? And what could we trade off? And how could we help you? And do some horse trading around. And if you still can't come to alignment, then maybe you appeal to the powers that be at the company level and say, we have a conflict between team A's priorities and team B's priorities. Can somebody resolve that for us? But if all of these things fail, then team A has to face the facts that they're not going to get team B's help. And you go back to, can we do it ourselves? Could we hire resources from outside? And if all of those fail, the answer is you cannot do that OKR this quarter. It has to wait.
Okay, thanks.
The key thing is not to skip that step. This key thing is not to get halfway into the quarter having committed to those OKRs and discover that team B is not ready to go.
Makes sense. And thanks for the question, Tanya. And so again, if you have any follow-ups, just throw them in the chat there. We'll just take one more. This is from Justin. So would you ever group teams around objectives? So for example, if a formed team works on reducing churn regardless of departments and their job roles.
Yeah, grouping teams together makes a lot of sense. I mean, they should be grouped together, broadly speaking anyway, in the sense that I just described, where they're comparing at least once a quarter, because there may be overlaps, duplication, or gaps, or dependencies to be managed. But there are lots of good situations where you want them to be in closer collaboration during the quarter as well, because they're working on closely related or complementary goals. Sometimes they might even have some shared resources, like they have one product manager between the two teams, or one engineering director or something like that. And that's a logical setup if they're working on, say, two big components of the same product that need to be developed in consultation. This is something that some companies that I work with are using the tribe structure for, is to say, all of these product teams, they're working on some things that are closely related. Maybe they all add up to one big product or product line. And so there is a tribe that owns them together. And so that tribe is kind of a middle step between the individual team and the company at large, if it's a large enough company, to have multiple tribes within it. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. And thanks very much again, Justin, for the question. So guys, we're going to finish up there. We could continue asking questions, I think, for another hour. There's a couple more I see there. Bruce, just in terms of where can people find out more or contact you if they do have any follow-up questions?
Yeah, email is bruce@productculture.com, and my website is the same thing, productculture.com. You can subscribe to my nano letter, one thing on product culture on that website. And my Twitter handle is data-driven, D8_driven.
Excellent. And listen, thanks so much again for your time. Hopefully we can see it in person in Dublin at some stage in the future at a product elevation event. But for now, we really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
I'm looking forward to getting back to in-person events. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again, Bruce.